what I'd like to do today is contrast the approach a physical therapist or a body worker might take to addressing some physical pain or chronic physical injury compared to the approach that I would take if somebody came to me with some physical chronic injury. And for the purposes of today, I actually have an injury or a discomfort that I've had for a while now that I'm going to explore and work with. So I'll guide you through and I'll show you exactly how I would work with an injury like this. This particular injury is a pain and a tightness around my left shoulder. I can feel it in here, around my collarbone, my clavicle, inside my clavicle, and also kind of connecting up into my chest bone and the lower vertebrae on my neck. And this started, I would say, about a month ago. I had a very intense period of work. I'd been staying in Serbia, then I worked in Ireland, then I flew back to the US, had I think just a weekend back in the US, flew to Canada for a really important business meeting, flew back to New York, had a week there, and then flew off to Canada again for 2 weeks in minus 35 degree weather, really, really cold weather, and then down to Mexico for some more work. So first of all, if I were to go to a physical therapist with an injury like this or a pain like this or a body worker, their attention would be on what are the physical symptoms and what are the physical pain. So let me start with the physical perspective for exploring this. So if I just bring my attention into it physically, first of all, there's a pain right in here that feels like it's in the bursa, which is the sac that kind of encapsulates the shoulder joint here. So there's definitely one particular piece in there that feels like it's an injury in the bursa. Then if I feel around, there's a tightness in the muscle here, and that's actually quite tender and delicate. That muscle there is definitely tight and unhappy. Right in here, there's some connective tissue between the collarbone and the muscles above the first rib here, which is really quite tight. And again, if I press in there, that's painful. And pressing in here actually sends a shooting pain down into my scapula, my shoulder blade at the back. If I look at range of motion, it's basically fine. There's a little tweak in here that gets a little painful. If I went to a physical therapist or a body worker, that's probably the approach they take. And chances are they would decide some of these ligaments are sprained or tight, or some of these muscles are definitely tight, and they would get to work on releasing any occlusions, any places where the connective tissue is stuck, and then relaxing the muscles and stuff like that. As you know, my approach is different, and in the article, How Emotions Get Trapped in the Body, I talked about how when we have an emotional issue, it tends to get trapped somewhere in the body, in one or several places in the body. And conversely, once we've trapped an emotion in the body, it tends to predispose it to injury or make it more likely that we'll have pain in that site. So from my perspective, looking at this now, the question I'm going to start asking myself, the thing I'm going to start exploring, is what are the emotional things that had my shoulder, had my clavicle, had my first rib tighten up, which then predisposed it to an injury. I'm not saying it caused the injury, but it made the injury much, much more likely. First of all, as I mentioned, I was doing an insane amount of travel. It was a very tight schedule, not what I'd normally want, but there were various reasons that I did that, and it was the right thing to do at the time, even though it was physically challenging for me. So one is quite simply that. Second thing is the time I had in Serbia. I found that difficult. I was just working and hanging out in Serbia, in Belgrade, but I found the environment there to be quite tense and a little scary, not overtly threatening, but there was a major civil war there and genocide and, really, really tough environment. And I think being around that country not that long after the war ended, being a natural empath, I think I kind of felt protected around that. there's a new project that's very exciting but very challenging, so I think I've got some tension around that. Oh, and then the last thing I think that's really relevant here is I'm a year into my blog, and I put together a review of everything I've accomplished in the last year in terms of people reading the blog and articles I've written and interest and stuff. And I posted that review on a online forum that I'm a member of, asking for feedback. And quite honestly, I was expecting everybody to tell me that it was great and wonderful and I was doing great and I was right on track. But in fact, what happened was basically everybody who responded to me told me I was paying attention to the wrong things, I was doing it all wrong, and gave me incredible advice for how I should change everything I was doing on the blog. Not the writing, but how I'm thinking about what I track and what I measure and what my plans are for next year. So while that was incredibly valuable for me, it was also really, really difficult emotionally to hear the feedback about something I was really proud of and I've put an enormous amount of work into over the last year. And now I think about it, it was right around then that this physical pain really started to develop. Looking at it from my perspective, the shoulders relate to relationship or connection with other people, and intuitively that makes sense. If I reach out to connect with somebody, I use my shoulder. If I push somebody away, I use my shoulders. If I embrace somebody, I use my shoulders. So it's no surprise that the shoulders would be involved in how open we are to connection, relationship, or how close we are to relationship or connection. You know, the tightening up when I was getting lots of difficult feedback makes sense. You know, it's like, no, I don't really like this feedback, please protect me, is that kind of tightening in the shoulder. And by the way, there was no particular injury I sustained. The first time I noticed this, when I woke up, it was like a pain or discomfort. And my first thought was I'd just slept on it funny and it would go away in a few hours, but it actually lingered and has persisted now for a month or more. What I'm going to do is drop in and start to bring my attention into my shoulder, clavicle, chest here, but bringing my attention less on the physical and more on the emotional content. And now I'm using that focusing attention of the frontal lobes, the conscious mind, to really bring my attention into this shoulder. Breathing into it and paying attention to it. Paying attention to the physical pain, but also starting to build a sense of curiosity about emotions. And one very important thing here is the mind, the conscious mind, likes to predict the future. It likes to know, it likes to be in control and in charge. And here I really have no idea what's going to happen, no idea what's going to unfold. And the important thing is to create a sense of conscious or intentional curiosity. So I'm bringing my attention into the body area without presupposition or expectation about what's going to happen. And as I do that, I can feel this area, the muscles just starting to relax. But the other thing that's happening is I'm also noticing there's more connected here. I'm actually noticing there's a pain and a discomfort in the muscles and connective tissue around my ribs here as well. So far, no idea what that's about, but I can start to explore it. I'm now beginning to use small movements. If we use big movements, it really is kind of mental, whereas if we use really small movements, it starts to engage the cerebellum and the motor cortex in ways that are outside of conscious awareness. And it's often the case that a conscious pain, what we're consciously, physically aware of, is actually a smoke shield or a barrier to hide the emotional pain. And right there, there's a spike in the physical pain. But there's also some emotional kind of charge there. And I really found it just by kind of randomly exploring around. But now that I find that spot, I can really kind of explore around it to accentuate it. And right there, it's almost a sense of nauseousness. It's a really unpleasant feeling. There's not like a standard emotional word for it, but it's kind of an unpleasant, dark, nauseous feeling. And that's gold. When you get something really unexpected like that kind of pops up out of nowhere. And there was one wave of release just by accepting it and connecting with it. I can already feel something has opened up, and there's more freedom in my lungs, the bottom of the lungs there. Importantly, I don't need to have words for what it is. I don't need to have a mental description for it. Simply connecting with it in its own terms is enough. And I will say that I've been at this long enough that once I find something, it releases for me quickly. If I was doing this with a client, we'd probably stop and pause there for maybe a minute or two and allow a slower process of release. And there's something inside the ribs and lung here. The lungs, as I discussed in my article on grief and sadness, are a primary place for storing unresolved sadness and grief in the body. So probably has something to do with sadness or loss, but the mental understanding doesn't really matter. The important thing is my body and subconscious have the willingness to explore it. And there's this arrangement of my neck and shoulder, and everything kind of compresses down into that point in the lung. And compression is a good way of increasing awareness of something that's closed off. I shifted fairly quickly in one or two breaths. And I don't know if you saw it, but there was just a release in some of the muscles in my shoulder here. Once this released, this part of my shoulder knew it was okay to let go. I'm starting to get the impression that this was more, I was forcing myself to work harder, to travel more, to deal with jet lag, to deal with new situations, senior people in a new client company. So I was driving myself without taking the time to deal with whatever emotions and issues were coming up. Most people have a habit of when they have an injury or a wound, physical or emotional, they tighten up around it and build layers and layers and layers over a lifetime. A lot of old people really are kind of twisted up in a way that's physically unhealthy and emotionally unhealthy because we build up these layers and we don't deal with them. 5, 10, 20, 50, 60 years really builds the likelihood of major physical injury and degeneration, and it's not necessary. All we need to do is be aware of when we build these wounds up and release them, and we can really retain vitality and freedom of movement and freedom of emotions into old age. That's two pieces that have shifted now. And I feel a lot more ease and openness. There's still physical pain, and it almost feels like it's in the periosteum here, or there are also ligaments around here. And in the back, right here, there's actually a muscle that's twitching. So there's something that's, when there's a muscle that twitches like that, I take it that it's thinking of letting go, it hasn't decided to let go, it's thinking of letting go, and so it's like this, twitching at that kind of speed in my shoulder blade there. And now I have a strong sense of confusion. The mind hates confusion. It wants to know what's going on. So I've got this drive to know or find out or push myself. But for healing, actually confusion is really great because it means the old model the old belief I had is no longer valid. And there's a new model, there's a new belief, there's a new physical and emotional arrangement waiting to emerge. So with this confusion, I'm really slowing down, because it means there's something really valuable here. Again, right here, that sense of ugh, kind of down through, it goes to a slightly different location in my lung, but it's a similar feeling of just ugh. That's a technical term, by the way. My mind wants to make bigger movements and stretch it out because this is painful under here, but I know it's actually more important to slow it down and let my body lead. And right now this is unpleasant enough. I kind of want to run away from it. But instead I'm just sticking with it. Okay, now I've got it. There's a feeling of kind of great compassion. There's a heat under my hand here. There's a lot of heat, a lot of energy, which indicates there's a healing or a repatterning going on. And there it is. Right, there's the top rib here, right under the first rib. Just like sadness, like I want to cry. The tightness in the muscles on the top of my shoulder was protecting that. So a lot of this tightness has just been protecting, closing off pain, tears. So very gently connecting with that with self-compassion. And it's a sense that with the breath, that emotion is flowing and releasing. Again, I've gotten quite practiced at this. If I were working with a client on this, we might spend 10 or 15 minutes here because this is a major piece. It's good to let them release just in their own time. Oh God, and it's like relief. It feels like such a relief to release this. But the important thing with this approach is I actually don't need to do all of the physical healing all at once, because now that the emotions have released, the reasons for tightening and protecting that part of my body, maybe it'll take 3, 4, 5 days a week, but now without the need to protect, the muscles and the ligaments are going to start relaxing out. Because the truth is, the body is great at healing. You know, we pull a muscle, we injure a ligament, the body actually knows how to heal those. We don't heal them because there's some reason not to. And in this case, I didn't heal it because I had to keep it all tight to protect and close off that emotion in the top of my lung. Now the emotion's gone, I can relax and ease those, and now the natural healing process of my muscles and ligaments in my shoulder can take over again. A body worker or physical therapist would have gone straight for massaging out the muscles, working on occlusions in the ligaments, which, trust me, can be really painful. And it would have been this physical process of working with the physical symptoms. My approach is to go underneath that to find out what is the source of the wound, what is the thing that's fueling and sustaining the injury, release that, and then allow the natural healing process to take over for itself. So that's it for today.